There's a lot going on this week. This week is moving very fast. I really wanted you to come in and give us your take on this. Somebody who's been in the intelligence community, somebody who's paid attention to politics, who's been out on the road. Tell me what you think is important about what's been happening for the last couple of days around this Ukraine whistleblower case.
Yeah, well, look, I think the big picture here is that the president welcomed foreign interference in 2016. He was not held accountable. He got through the Mueller investigation and what followed in Congress essentially without being held accountable. Now, some of those efforts in Congress were ongoing, have been ongoing, are still ongoing, yes. But I think his read was, I am above the law. I cannot be indicted according to the DOJ's own policy, and Congress doesn't have the political will to hold me accountable. Therefore, I've got a clean slate to perhaps pursue foreign interference again. And I think he feels compelled to do that because the last remaining check on the president in real terms is the people, the people of the United States of America through an election. And if he's not going to be held accountable through some legal process or through a political process in Congress, then the only thing he really has to overcome in order to completely be unaccountable to anyone is to, again, get past an election despite his unpopularity.
When you think about what's going on right now from a national security perspective, what's the greatest threat? Is it how the president abuses the institutions, or are there damages he's doing to the U.S. reputation abroad that will have longer lasting impacts that we should really be concerned about?
The thing I'm most concerned about is whether there is a check on the president of the United States. Yes, there have been court decisions here and there that have not gone in the president's way. But what I'm really talking about is something far more fundamental. It's whether the president of the United States can be checked in the ultimate sense. Can he be removed from office by anyone or anything? If Congress doesn't have the political will to do that, mainly because Republicans are placing more importance on party interest than on the interests of the country. And I think because Democrats have been looking at this situation in a very conventional way leading up to the Ukraine situation, although now I think that's not necessarily the case anymore. They realize what's at stake here. But my concern is simply that we head down a road as a country where we can no longer decide who is our president, where the people no longer get to decide that, where there is no effective check in a meaningful way on the president of the United States. We tend to not even consider that that's a possibility because this is the United States of America. But you know, we have some things going for us here. We have some institutions that are still strong in certain ways. I understand that. The independent press is still doing very well. But we can, like other countries have, lose the ability to replace a president, to force a president out of office through a democratic process.
Let's talk a little bit about what may be happening right now in terms of the intel community. So this person has come forward as a whistleblower. What does it take for someone who does this day in and day out to be willing to come forward and say, I'm seeing things at the highest level of our government that I think are a threat to the government?
I think it's just a huge decision for someone like that to make. I mean, most of these professionals, you try to avoid the limelight. They do whatever they can for that. They're often not on social media or not really on social media. They avoid the press like the plague. They try to live quiet lives because that allows them to be effective in their jobs and makes it easier for them to avoid making mistakes with the very sensitive information they have. But what drives most of them, from my experience, is a deep and true commitment to the interests of this country because of its values, because of the values that it aspires to. It's not to say that we're a perfect country, never have been, and that's sort of an eternal quest, I think, to live up to our values. It should be. But they believe in those values and they're fighting for those values and they make tremendous sacrifices for them. And I think that's what's more important, even more important than their desire to avoid the limelight. And so when those two things come into conflict, there will be some who will decide I'm going to step forward, even though I risk public scrutiny or criticism or whatever.
You think they'll still have a job if they came forward and the name was known?
If the name was known under this president, I think there's going to be serious retribution. I think the president will do everything he can to harm them. I think the president's allies will as well. I mean, this person, whoever it is, if they're known, and I'm sad to say that they likely will be known eventually, maybe they're okay with that. Maybe they're willing to deal with that. I don't know. But they will pay a significant professional sacrifice. They may lose their current jobs. They may have a hard time being employed otherwise because people won't want to deal with that kind of controversy. But I will say that whoever that whistleblower is very likely an American hero, and they will likely go down in history. I think this is a historic moment. They likely will go down in history as somebody, as a great American who selflessly made a sacrifice for the country. Let's see as we learn more facts, but what we know now leads me to believe that this is somebody who's truly acting in the interest of the country, the best interests of the country.
It's fair to say you're a conservative, right?
I consider myself a conservative independent.
Yeah. So why aren't more conservatives coming forward with concerns about something that seems to be, as someone who was raised kind of in the, as a kid during the Reagan era, right? You think of Republicans as being the big national security party.
Yeah.
Why aren't more conservatives coming forward in this era where it seems like our national security is under some threat?
Well, I'm sad to say that it's clear that many Republicans in Congress are more committed to keeping their seats and to the interests of the party than they are to the interests of the country now. And people are asking, well, what are Republicans in Congress going to do now? And actually, some have candidly surprised me by making early statements of concern. And I know.
Who do you like? Who do you think is?
Who do I like?
Job?
Well,
who's doing a good job?
I appreciate the commentary so far of Senator Romney and some others who have made even more muted statements, but and they're often criticized for that, but I'm not so fast to criticize them. We're early in this process still. We know a lot, but there's a lot more to learn, I think. And even today we learned a lot more about an effort to perhaps, as the whistleblower complaint alleges, cover up information about the president's abuse of power as captured in that phone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine. There's more to learn. We'll see where people end up. I always try to stay optimistic, but another part of me thinks that there are stronger dynamics in favor of them not standing up for what is good for the country at this moment than ever before in the Trump presidency. And the reason why is the following. Simply, the president is up for re-election now. He is the top of the Republican ticket. If this administration collapses because it's found essentially guilty of such corruption, which is what we're apparently seeing now with these complaints and transcript. I think.
Do you think he could get convicted?
I think it's very difficult for that to happen, but I would not yet rule it out, and I'm an optimist by nature, so maybe that, but it's still possible. It's still possible for that to happen. But I'll tell you, even if it isn't possible, because there are those who say, why impeach the president? Because it'll go to the Senate and the Senate won't convict and it'll die there. And then the president will say, well, you impeached me, but you couldn't convict me, therefore I didn't do anything wrong. Well, imagine if he's going to say it then, imagine what he'll say if you don't impeach him, right, and you needed to. But what I'll say is that if House Democrats and maybe a few Republicans hopefully do impeach the president, it'll go to the Senate. Hopefully there's some kind of fair process there that Mitch McConnell will allow that to happen, allow the House to make its case in the Senate. And then let's force every senator, Republican, Democrat, Independent, to go on record in this moment of national need. Where did you stand in this moment? And if Republicans who are up for re-election in the Senate and who are in competitive seats, if they want to fail to stand up for the United States of America and for the people of this country, then I believe that is going to harm them most likely in their re-election bids. And that's something that then House or Senate Republican leadership needs to think about, and that may change the way they handle an impeachment coming from the House. The other thing about it is that if that dynamic that I just described forces a fair process in the Senate, or a somewhat fair process in the Senate, in which members of the House, Adam Schiff, for example, are making the case to the Senate, and the Senate is asking questions, and then and these facts are being played for the American people on television. That's going to happen, keep in mind, in the context of the presidential election. So even if he is not convicted and removed from office, I believe that those processes, those convenings in the proceedings in the Senate and the House, I think will help the American people process the threat that the president poses to the country. And so if he's not removed from office through conviction in the Senate, I think the American people will then have a much greater ability to understand the decision before them in 2020.
You run again?
For the presidency? I don't plan to do that right now. I do plan to pursue public office again. Most likely it would be a different office. There are some wild scenarios. If the president is reelected again with foreign help again, then my posture will change significantly. But
what does that mean?
It means that at that point, if he's reelected with foreign interference, I think what that means is that we have lost our democracy, and it's time for civic actors who may not have served in Congress before, for example, but who are engaged in the fight for democracy. It's time for all of us to step up even more, and that might be a scenario by which I would do more on this front, challenging the president directly. But I hope that that's not the case. That's not the situation we end up in.